You better not duck me, Thun. You better not. I'm coming. Keith One-Time Thurman delivers the bad news. A shocking truth. The shocking revelation on what he noticed from Errol Spence on that fateful night versus Terrence Bud Crawford. To find out exactly what he said, you need to pay attention to this video. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Please subscribe to the channel. My name is Ego. I've been covering boxing over 10 years. Subscribe. Best in the business, and it's not even close. Brand new interview from Keith, you better not duck me, Thun, One-Time Thurman. And usually you can expect this from a Keith Thurman interview. He's very articulate. He tries to, really break down from his perspective the status in the game of boxing. And he said some pretty interesting things about Errol Spence Jr. Spoiler, one of those things that he says Errol Spence, given his current condition, or on that given night versus Terrence Crawford, he wouldn't get past 6 rounds with your boy One-Time Thurman. Now, don't shoot the messenger. You guys let me know in the comment section if you either agree or if you disagree with that statement from Keith One-Time Thurman. So in this interview with Fight Hype, he really broke down a variety of different things. He says that Errol Spence Jr., basically exactly what your boy Ego told you. He says on the night he fought Terrence Crawford, and in general, he says Errol Spence, pre-accident, post-accident, these are not the same. Not the same fighter at all. He says he noticed some give in Errol Spence, not in this fight with Kell Brook, but after that accident. Ironically enough, when your boy Ego says very similar things, people get mad. Oh, you don't know. You're just a silly YouTuber. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you're just hating on Crawford. Oh, you don't want to give Crawford credit. But then you have other people, their observations sound very, and I do mean very, similar to what I've told you. You got guys like trainer Abel Sanchez. He said Errol Spence Jr. looked loaded on the ring walk. He looked like he was truly like under some influence walking out in the Terrence Crawford fight. And in this interview, you had Keith Thurman, who basically said the same thing. He didn't say loaded or he looked high, but he did say that he did not see, he says, just like Scarface said, the eyes, Chico, the eyes never lie. He said he looked in the eyes of Errol Spence. He says he was at the fight, and it was like some Mayweather versus Cotto. Big atmosphere, big PBC event, and it was electric. Undisputed in the glamour division, like the welterweight division. The lights, the stars were in the crowd. And he says when he looked at both fighters walking out for such a moment, with Errol Spence, he didn't see that same bite, that same hunger. He says Crawford walked out looking like he wanted to set history and become a 2X undisputed champion. But he says when he looked in Errol Spence's eyes, it was just void. He says one fighter looked like they were going to try to set history, and they were walking out trying to claim their stake in the welterweight division, again, a historic glamour division. And he said he looked in the eyes of the other fighter, Errol Spence, and it looked like he was going to walk out into the abyss, like the unknown. Another interesting point, and I'm just going off of with Keith Thurman, you better not duck me, Thun, what he said. But I have to go back and watch it myself. But from Keith's recollection, he says when the fighters did the ring walk and the both fighters were in the ring, he says that Derek James, trainer of Errol Spence, his body language was more pronounced. He said Derek James was in there like shadow boxing and stuff like that. And he said he was thinking like, yo, how come the trainer has the more pronounced body language and not the fighter? Like, Derrick James is a former fighter. Let's not get that twisted. But at that given moment in this point of his career, he's the trainer. So he's like, why is the trainer like, throwing combinations and shadow boxing, and he got that spirit, but then Errol Spence looks quote unquote flat, right? And again, that's Keith Thurman's recollection of what happened. I have to go back and watch that because I personally don't remember that specifically. But then again, your boy Ego was conducting a very successful Boxing Ego watch party, BWP. So for more content like the watch parties that I created for boxing and boxing news, make sure you guys again subscribe to the channel. So basically, Keith Thurman is saying that one fighter looked ready for the get down and the other fighter, it just looked like something was off. Now, there's different speculation and different people feel different ways about what that could be. Keith Thurman says that since the accident, he doesn't believe that Errol Spence has been the same. And other people have contended that. And it's so funny in the world of boxing. I told you and then I showed you my greatness on this mic. I say things, whether they're popular, whether they're unpopular, I don't really care. I give you my honest take in world boxing. But usually what happens is when you get some of the experts, the fighters, the trainers, they come in and really back up what your boy Ego been saying. Something looked off with Errol Spence Jr. And Keith Thurman was basically saying in this interview that he believes that Errol Spence, like, how do I say it? He almost sounded like Errol Spence's team, they were hiding something. Like they were fighting the Danny Garcias and the Yordenis Ugases of the world, and they were able to get through those fights. But they were very mum about like Errol's real condition. Keith Thurman was basically implying that, these things under a watchful eye, if people paid attention, that the deterioration of Errol Spence maybe would be prevalent, but people just weren't paying attention to it enough because he was getting through Ugas, he was getting through Danny Garcia. But it sounded like Keith Thurman, if I'm interpreting what he said correctly, it sounded like he believed that there's been some serious residual damage from Errol Spence in terms of before and after the accident. And I mean, it's hard to say. I'm not a doctor, but at the end of the day, the version of Errol Spence that showed up with Terrence Crawford, we have never seen that. We have never seen that. And I guess the conversation becomes, how much credit do you give to Crawford for that versus Crawford coupled with the fact that Errol Spence, maybe had some residual damage. Like Errol Spence himself said that he had cataracts in the fight. Like, these things start to make a whole lot of sense when you look at how the fight played out. And I know boxing fans are gonna, oh, you're just making excuses. Two things can be true. I'm not really here to debate and argue with people and all that. I've been doing this at a high level, elite ego for a long time. The bottom line is Errol Spence looked like something was wrong with him. Credit to him. He showed a lot of heart. Every time he got dropped, he picked himself up, but it just was a bad night in the office. I don't know exactly all of the details of what went on and what transpired with Errol Spence leading up to the fight. But again, the elephant in the room, the Crawford fans don't want to acknowledge this, but it's what we've seen. It's like almost like somebody having a supernatural experience. Like you go to this old like castle Airbnb in London in the UK, right? And it's notorious for being haunted, a haunted castle, right? and you experience plates flying and all this supernatural paranormal activity. And it may sound crazy to people who didn't witness it or see it. I get it. But at the end of the day, you're not going to deny what your eyes seen. And that little simile and metaphor, analogy, if you will, is how I looked at the Errol Spence fight. I can't put my hand on everything because I wasn't in camp with either fighter, but I do know what my eyes seen, and I have studied and watched all of these fighters' fights. And here's another aspect that only your boy Ego brought up. It's no mystery to me that Errol Spence Jr. goes through this horrific accident that nearly claimed his life, and subsequently after that, things change. Like, I don't even recall a singular time where Errol Spence Jr. had any type of injuries that were public knowledge and clear for the public to see. I'm not saying like, oh, he pulled his hamstring or something and he was able to get through it. I'm talking about like clear-cut injuries that are very visible. Post-accident Errol, there's several. Detached retina stopped him from fighting Pacquiao, right? He says he has cataracts. Another video with the patch over his eye, cataracts. And this is what Teofimo was saying. And again, people get mad at BOXINGEGO or Tio, and they say, oh, you're just hating on Crawford. But again, people aren't going to deny what they've seen. Teofimo Lopez, he said that Crawford keeps getting opponents when they're handicapped, not fresh, not off of the best wins and things like that. Another example of this is I never recall a time where Errol Spence mouthpiece kept flying out of his mouth. Post-accident dental issues because some of his teeth got knocked out from the accident, right? It happened in the Danny Garcia fight. It happened in the Ugas fight. So again, Errol Spence, there's a career before the accident, and we never seen this. Like, before the accident, he's fighting Sean Porter toe-to-toe, up close and personal. Never do I recall his mouthpiece getting spit out or knocked out. But it happened in back-to-back fights. Back-to-back fights. So I think people may have wanted Errol Spence Jr. to be like, have no residual damage. And there was maybe even a sense of false hope after the Danny Garcia and Ugas, because stylistically, you know, his style would play well with those styles. But as Keith Thurman says in this interview, he says that athletic punchers would always be a kryptonite. And that's the thing. And that's what I'm saying with two things could be true. You could have stylistic kryptonites, but then coupled with the fact that if things went wrong in camp, you have these residual like effects from the accident. That style could have always been your kryptonite. Let's say Crawford, athletic puncher, ambidextrous, southpaw. That could always, no matter what, maybe he beats Errol Spence. But the way it looked was beyond that, to me at least. It looked like there was other things going on. And as Keith Thurman says, that version of Errol Spence doesn't beat Sean Porter and other welterweights. And ironically, Keith Thurman is saying these things that I said before anybody, because I said it in real time immediately after the fight. The version of Errol Spence that I seen on that given night does not beat some of the people he's already beat, because it looked like he had several things working against him. You could say I'm making excuses. I don't really care. I'm never gonna not speak my mind to appease anybody. You have one option. Don't watch me. But I'm not gonna sugarcoat the conversation. So interesting stuff from Keith Thurman. He says that Errol Spence, he's definitely not the same. He said he's seen it in his eyes. And again, you have to ask yourself, why is everyone saying that? Nobody said this for Errol Spence Sean Porter fight, which I was at. Nobody said this for Errol Spence versus Kell Brook. So basically, realistically, right? But now they're saying they seen almost like a void in his eye like he was walking into the unknown. So I don't know if we'll ever know exactly what went on. It depends on team Errol Spence and what they divulge. But Keith Thurman says a rematch would probably not be any different. He did, however, go over the notion that he actually was scheduled to fight Errol Spence and he got in that other smaller accident. And he said people graze over that fact. But he was actually supposed to fight. But Errol Spence being stubborn and still feeling he could beat. So partly Errol Spence's fault, because if what I'm saying is true and he had all these things going on, his stubbornness also bought him that L, right? Because at the end of the day, you chose to stubbornly continue to go after the Crawford fight. So if you did need a tune-up or needed some more time, you chose to bypass that. So Errol does get the blame there. Let me know what you guys think of Keith Thurman's breakdown. I thought it was some good stuff. Watch the interview. Subscribe to my channel. Best in the business. And it's not even close.